Hello, and welcome to Second Best University, a reading companion podcast for Dungeons & Dragons. I'm Steven, and I'll be your book club buddy. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Second Best University, the only university where the students are interested in the rules. No running on the quad. You can't cohabitate with your partner. These are the rules we love. Just kidding. At this university, I have no control over your lifestyle, and I love it. But what we do is we read the rules of Dungeons & Dragons, starting with the basic rules, which you can get by going on Safari or whatever browser you use and typing in Dungeons & Dragons basic rules and downloading that sweet PDF. Last time, we read Chapter 7, Using Ability Scores. Using ability scores could be described as everything but combat. So this time we're reading Chapter 9, Combat. Now, I'm going to say it again, and I'm probably going to have to say it a couple more times. I am aware that 7 and 9 are separated by the number 8, but I'm not doing this in the order that the numbers go in. I'm doing it in the order that the rules make sense in. Chapter 8 is downtime activities and stuff like that. Let me clarify for you. You don't need to know that more than you need to know combat. You gotta know combat. This chapter is probably the most important chapter in all of Dungeons & Dragons. If you are the person who's been listening and not reading, that's totally cool. I love it. But if you're gonna read one chapter ever, read combat. It's the biggie. And hey, what better time to do that than the present? That's right. So let's get going reading the basic rules, Chapter 9, Combat. Hello, and welcome back. I hope you had a great time reading, or a great time not reading, and enjoying those sweet, sweet tunes. Either way, we're back now, and we have to talk about combat. Combat is a huge part of Dungeons & Dragons rules. Most of the rules that we read will be about combat in some way. And literally every single player character has a class, and the class is pretty much defined by its relationship to combat. In a lot of ways, combat is the heart of D&D. And in other ways, combat is like the spleen of D&D. Now, don't get me wrong, good combat is really exciting and can be very narratively interesting. But what makes Dungeons & Dragons special is everything except the combat. The combat is a relic of the fact that Dungeons & Dragons came out of wargaming, which I'm not going to get into again. I did it in episode 1. I promise I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But the combat system of Dungeons & Dragons, if you were to take it at face value and play it as a game, it's fun, it's good, but it's not like a tremendous game in its own right. What makes it fun is that every person is invested in it for different reasons. Everybody wants a different outcome. Or you get to have all these cool character moments and you're imagining your awesome Brad, the bard, singing a sweet tune to Cassandra, the mighty caster, or whatever it is. That imagery is more exciting than the actual rules of combat that you've just read through. And that's okay. The rules can be tactically shallow because they expect you to overlay a lot of story. Because they expect people to be invested for reasons besides wanting to detangle the rules of combat. So, I would strongly recommend not getting too caught up in the rules of combat. Try to make it feel narratively fun for yourself. And, that's it. Well, that's what combat is. And combat is fun. If combat wasn't fun, then the John Wick movies wouldn't be fun. But combat is fun, so they are fun. That's the truth. That's the truth. That's what you learned at this university. I guess what I'm just trying to say is, combat is a bunch of rules. Don't take it too seriously. It's not more important than the story. Nothing is more important than the story. So if you mess up a combat rule, and a player's giving you a hard time, or a DM's giving you a hard time, or people are like, you should have done this, you should have done that. It's okay. It's all right. Tell those people to see me after class, and I will talk to them about how D&D is about storytelling, and Dungeons & Dragons gives structure to the story. And the structure it mostly gives is how to fight to the death. So, without further ado, what are the actual rules? How do I play this game, this combat fight simulator? Combat is all about the order things happen in. And the order that things happen in is SPIT. S-P-I-T. This is from the rules. The things you need to figure out before combat are surprise. That's S. So, surprise. If one side of the combat has surprised the other, then the side that was caught off guard doesn't get to do anything for one round, which we'll go over later, and the ambushers get to take their turns for a round. So they get one free round against their opponents. It used to be called the surprise round. Now, for some reason, the developers don't like to call it that, but that's still what it is. Don't tell them I told you that. The second thing, the P, is position. So SP, position. Position is just, where is everybody relative to everybody else? If you're playing on a board, this is a good time to set it up right after the surprise. If you're doing theater of the mind, this is a good time to try to make sure that everyone understands the general layout of the place where combat will be happening and all of the combatants involved. SPI, I is initiative. Initiative is the first time combat is fun. Position's not usually fun. Surprise can be very fun. Initiative is the order that combatants take their turns in. So everybody rolls a d20 and they add their initiative to it. Initiative is usually just your dex modifier, unless you have some sort of cool initiative-based abilities. If you're the dungeon master, you just roll once for each type of monster. So if there's 4 kobolds, they all get 1 initiative, and they all go at one time. They don't get like kobold 1, kobold 2, kobold 3, because that's really, it's honestly too finicky. So write these all down, everyone's initiative, and then the high roll goes first, and then the next roll, the next highest goes second, and the next highest goes third, and so on. What do I mean they go? Go what? Go home? Go to the store? Go out of town. No, they take their turns. Turns. Everyone takes a turn in initiative order. When everyone has had a turn, you have gone around the table once. That is a round. Sometimes I recommend that the dungeon master just rolls once for all monsters, regardless of their type, in order that it is a literal round of the table. I think that can be very fun and simple. Anyway, turns. So, surprise, position, initiative, turns, SPIT. Surprise, position, initiative, turns. If you're a player, you don't even have to worry about this, really. It's just going to be initiative turns as the dungeon master tells you, but if you're the dungeon master, surprise, position, initiative, turns. Stephen? I hear you saying in the back, Stephen! Stephen! I'm just a little mouse student, apparently. I come to this university to learn, so I can teach my mice friends how to play D&D better. Now you say turns. What's a turn? To me, a mouse. Great question, Mouse. What is a turn? What can I do on a turn? It's my turn. What does that mean? That means I can do stuff. Heck yes. That's my favorite part of playing games, is doing things. What can I do? On your turn, you can do 3 things. You can move. You can move up to your speed. So if your speed is 30 feet, which is the usual speed for medium creatures, you can move up to 30 feet. You can move 2 feet. You can move 6 feet. Usually, in Dungeons & Dragons, we really like increments of 5 feet. We really like increments of 5 feet. So try to move in 5 feet increments. You can move. If it's difficult terrain, then it's twice as hard to move over. It takes an extra foot per foot of movement, which is the worst way to talk about it, but it's very hard to move over. You can only move half your distance. Same if you're on your hands and knees. If you're crawling around, you can only move half the distance. If you're crawling through difficult terrain, you can only move 1/3 of the distance. That's everything you'll ever need to know about movement. Movement, that's it. Action. Action is the second thing you can do. That is basically everything. We'll get into it more later, but the things you can do on your turn is you can move, you can take an action, which we'll get into what that means later. Usually it's an attack. And you can take a bonus action. A bonus action, though, is like a ticket. You have 1 bonus action ticket per turn. What do I mean by that? Why am I saying that differently from movement and action? Because a bonus action is not something you can use by default. There is no default bonus action. But lots of classes or items or spells will use bonus actions. And if something uses a bonus action, then you have 1 bonus action on your turn. If I have 2 things that say, you can use a bonus action to such and such, then I can only do 1 of those 2 things on any given turn. So, bonus actions are different from actions because an action, there are actions that everybody can do. Everybody can attack, everybody can help, everybody can search. These are actions we'll talk about later, but every character in the game, every monster can take these actions. There's no bonus action that everybody can do. Bonus actions. The hardest part of D&D combat is bonus actions. And then finally, that's your turn. Your turn is over. The only other thing you can do is during a round, but not on your turn, on anybody else's turn, you can take a reaction. A reaction is something you can do in reaction to something else. There's only one reaction that everybody has by default, and it's called an opportunity attack. If you are fighting someone, if someone's in melee range of you, which is 5 feet away from you, if somebody's in melee range with you, and they leave your melee range, you can use your reaction to make an opportunity attack against that combatant. That's what a reaction is. So those are the things that you can do on your turn. You can take movement, you can move up to your speed. You can take an action, which we'll get into the various types of actions in a little bit. If you have a way to use a bonus action, you can use 1 bonus action. And during the round, you can use 1 reaction. Bada bing, bada boom. That's the core of Dungeons & Dragons combat. Everything else revolves around those 4 things. If you can remember those 4, you can do anything. Movement, action, bonus action, reaction. That's the whole game. Stephen, it's me! Stephen, it's me, the mouse in the back of the class again. Why? Why are you taking all this time to talk about everything if it's just these 4 things? I can read about actions. Why? Why are we doing this? This isn't a game. Everybody can move. Everybody can act. What's cool? Give me the strats. Give me the hardcore strats. How do I win? Mouse, I love your enthusiasm, and I hate your tone. I hate your tone, Mouse. And I hate to be this professor, but gosh darn it, your voice is too dang squeaky, Mouse. I feel like you should see a nurse. Or honestly, 2 nurses. Because it's pretty bad. But the heart of your question is very good. How do you win at Dungeons & Dragons combat? There's basically the core idea. When you look up tactics for D&D combat, the term you're going to come across a lot is the action economy. Action economy. It's good for action economy. All that means is using all of the possible actions you can on a round. Using your action, bonus action, and reaction every round. And if you can somehow get more actions out, using those. There are some weird ways to get extra actions. Action economy is the basic idea that there are 2 types of fight in D&D. There are fights where one side is definitely going to win. And if you're in one of those fights, it kind of doesn't matter what you do. If, for instance, if Bug, right now in second best, was to fight a single rat, it doesn't matter how crafty the rat is. Bug's got this one in the bag. If it's a fair fight, if the rat's out in the open, Bug can move, act, and bonus act the heck out of that rat. He'll kill it every time. The rat should be trying to get away. Bug should be trying to get the rat. Dunzo. Bug would never kill a rat. That's why I use it's a hypothetical. It could never happen. So that's the one type of fight, is a very one-sided fight. The other type of fight is a close fight. In a close fight, what's going to matter most, if a bug fought another bug, what's going to matter most is who uses their actions most effectively and who gets more actions. That's all action economy is about. So, the biggest part of action economy is understanding what your most effective actions are and setting yourself up for success with those actions and using them often. The big part of this is if you can find ways to provoke opportunity attacks, that's a huge win for you because you essentially give yourself an extra attack every round. If you can use your bonus action to get another attack, that's huge for you. We'll talk more about spells periodically, but the big spell for this is there are spells like Spiritual Weapon is incredible because it lets you attack on your bonus action. Huge, humongous, a huge boon. Spells that take a bonus action are great. You can search D&D Beyond for them, and you can sort by bonus action. I love it. You can sort by casting time, and bonus action is one of them. I love it. It's tremendous. So, action economy is the idea that you want to take more of the most effective action that you can. That's basically how to be a tactics genius. Now, the second part of how to be a tactics genius in Dungeons & Dragons is advantage and disadvantage. You want to have advantage as often as you can. And you want your enemies to have disadvantage as often as you can. If you didn't listen to the last episode, we went over the math of advantage and disadvantage, but I'll give you the Cliff's Notes. I'll give you the brief summary of advantage and disadvantage. Having advantage is a big advantage. And having disadvantage is not an advantage. It's like an anti-advantage. If it helps, think of it as an anti-advantage. So that is the action economy. Take as many of the most effective actions as you can, as often as you can. And usually when we think about the action economy, we don't think about just one player, we think about the team. Bards are a big part of this. Bards are a huge part of the action economy because they help other players be more effective with the actions that they have. We'll talk more about that when we get to bards, but it's a huge boon. All this to say, take as many as you can of action, bonus action, and reaction on every round, and you will win the majority of D&D combat. So, Now that we've said all this, what in God's name can I do during an action? Actions in combat. There are a lot of different actions. I'm going to start with the most common action in combat, which is weaving. Weaving is a big part of combat. You want to take thread or any sort of ropey object and move it in and out of itself. It's hard to describe. And that's the end of that sentence. I'm just kidding. Weaving has nothing to do with this. The biggest action in combat is going to be the attack action. What is the attack action? The attack action is an action you can take to attack. Sadly, if you were intrigued by the weaving action, it does not exist. Let's talk about attacking. If I take the attack action, I can attack one time. There are some classes that get extra attacks. Does that mean they get extra actions? No, friend. No. That means that when they take the attack action, they can attack more than once. Pretty cool. Steven, what does it mean to attack? I'm glad you asked, Steven, and I'm doubly glad you're not doing that weird mouse voice anymore that you started accidentally earlier in the episode. I'm still here! You be quiet! I told you to go to nurses. Anyway, what is an attack? An attack is basically a skill check. We talked about skill checks last episode. The rules build on each other, everybody. That's why we're doing it in this order. An attack is basically a skill check. You roll a d20, and you add a modifier to it. If it's a melee attack, you add your strength modifier. If it's a range attack, you add your dex modifier. And if you have proficiency with whatever you're attacking with, then you add your proficiency bonus. Heck yeah! That's skills. That's a skill. Now this time, instead of comparing the outcome to a difficulty class, you compare it to the target's armor class, or AC. Armor class, the average is 10. Dex can make it go up. Different armors can make it go up. But we'll get into that later. Basically, if you equal or exceed the AC, you hit with your attack. Heck yeah. If you roll a 20, you definitely hit with your attack. If you roll a 1, you definitely miss with your attack. Darn it. Carp, that stinks. So, let's say you hit with your attack. You get to roll damage. If you're attacking unarmed, if it's an unarmed strike, it's just 1 damage, plus your strength modifier. But if you're using a weapon, that weapon has a damage dice. You roll that dice, and you add whatever modifier you added to the attack roll earlier. So if you're in melee, you add your strength modifier. If you're ranged, you add your dex modifier. Bada bing, bada boom. That's damage. You've done that much damage. What does that mean? That means that the target's health points, or hit points, HP, is reduced by that number. So if they have 20 hit points and you do 5 damage, they now have 15 hit points. Why do I care about this number? Great question. Not that mouse, who I hope is at nurses. Why do I care about the target's HP? Because if any character's HP goes to 0 or below, they are dying. They fall unconscious, and if they're a monster, they usually just die. But if they're a player character, they start dying, which means they make death saving throws. Every turn, if you're dying, you must roll a d20. If you roll higher than 10, that's a success. If you roll 10 or lower, that's a failure. If you get 3 failures before you get 3 successes, then you die. The other way to die is instant death. You can instantly die if you take more damage in a single round than your remaining HP plus your max HP. That sounds confusing, but basically, if you have 50 HP max and you're at 10 HP and something does 60 damage to you, then it depletes the 10 damage you have, and you would go to negative 50, which is the negative version of your HP. That would be instant death. Boom. Just like that, in just this one action. Just in attacking, we covered melee, range, AC, critical hits. Oh, I didn't cover critical hits. If you get a 20 on your attack roll, then when you roll damage, you get to roll all of the damage dice for that attack twice. Now, this is crucial. You get to roll all the damage dice for that attack twice. that doesn't mean you get to roll, like, if it poisons them or if it wounds them, you don't get to roll that damage twice later on. You just get to roll it for the attack. So that's attacking. The other action that's very common is to cast a spell. Casting a spell is not an action. And I have to bring it up because I have to say that. Casting a spell is not an action. But some spells have a cost that is an action. Some spells have a bonus action. Some spells have a reaction. When you look at a spell, look at the casting time. If it's an action, then you can do it in an action. A lot of those spells are damage spells. Some of those spells are tactical spells, like darkness. So that's the other big action. Attack is this one. There's also casting, which can also be kind of like attacking. There's something called a spell attack. Now, what is a spell attack? A spell attack is when you attack with a spell. If you cast a spell and it does damage, probably it will tell you to make a ranged spell attack. A ranged spell attack is an attack roll, so you roll a d20. Then instead of adding strength or dex, you add whatever your spell casting modifier is. So, like, if your class is focused on wisdom, then you would use your wisdom modifier. If your class is focused on intelligence, then you'd use your intelligence modifier. And with any spell attack, you add your proficiency bonus. So now, all of those modifiers are in play in combat as well. So all of the abilities are used in combat. Constitution is how you get HP. Strength and dexterity are about range and melee. Int is about casting for wizards. Charisma is about casting for sorcerers. Wisdom's about casting for clerics. And there are other classes that use all of these. Some more actions. There are other actions you can take besides attacking. For instance, I said earlier that you want to get opportunity attacks as often as you can. That conversely means you want your opponent to get opportunity attacks very infrequently. And luckily they've given us an action to deal with this. That's the disengage action. If you take the disengage action, then all of your movement for that turn does not provoke opportunity attacks. You can move as much as you want around anybody you want, and they cannot opportunity attack you. Them's the rules. The other big movement action is dash. Dash lets you move again. Dash lets you move up to your movement speed as your action. So theoretically on your turn, you could move and then dash and go double your speed, which is awesome. Some classes can dash as a bonus action, and they can move, dash as their action, and dash as their bonus action. That's buck wild. That's crazy town. That's so fast. The next big action I want to talk about is help. Help is tremendous. Help lets you give advantage on an ability check to somebody else by helping them. So if Yolanda saw that Bug was trying to move a lever in order to make a portcullis come down so that their enemies couldn't follow them, then Yolanda could use the help action so that when Bug uses uses his turn to try to move that lever, the strength check will have advantage. You can also help people with attacks. If you want to, you can feint and distract their target, and then the first attack that your ally has against that target will have advantage. So if they have like several attacks, it'll only affect the first one. But still, pretty good. Now these next two are huge, and to be honest, before Rogue's Gallery, I messed these up all of the time. All of the time. But that's why we're reading the rules. That's why I'm reading the rules, is so that I know them better. These actions are crucial for stealthy combat. They're hide and search. Hide is the action to hide from your opponents. It lets you take an action to try to blend in. Rogues can do this on a bonus action. We'll get into it later. But hide lets you hide if there's something to hide behind. You can't just hide. If you're standing in a flat room and everybody's looking at you, you can't hide. There's no way to hide. Search, finding somebody who is like this, is also an action. It takes an action to find someone who is hiding, which means that there is an action economy there, because if I hide for my action, then I know that you'd have to take an action to find me with your search. That's big. That's important. Also, if someone is hidden, if one combatant cannot see another combatant, things get really crazy. If you are hidden, you have advantage on attack rolls against whoever cannot see you. And if you can't see someone, you have disadvantage on attack rolls against them. That means that's basically you have me having advantage and you having disadvantage is my goal all the time in D&D combat. So hiding is very powerful. It's very, very powerful. As is blinding someone or being in magical darkness that you can see through. All of these are situations where I can see you and you can't see me. That's great for D&D combat. So hide and search, very important. The final action I want to go over, and again, we're not covering everything in this chapter because it's jam-packed. If you're going to read one chapter, make it this one. Other stuff will come up later, and I'll cover it as it comes up. But the final action I'm going to cover is readying. Readying an action is something that people have heard of a lot, and it is something that makes sense logically that translates weirdly into D&D combat. Because when you ready an action, what you're doing is you take your action to ready yourself to use your reaction to do that thing. This is not great for the action economy. Let's say if someone comes in the door, I want to hit them with a bat. Okay, so I take my action to ready myself to take a reaction to do that. Since I can only take one action on my turn, that's basically the end of my turn besides my bonus action. That's like a big part of my turn gone. And I cannot use my reaction for anything else if I still want this ready action to work. So best case scenario, I use my action and reaction to do something. If somebody walks away from me during that, I don't get opportunity attacks on them. Or if I do take the opportunity attack, I now can't hit this person coming in the door with the bat. So it's sort of oddly not in your favor to ready an action. And I think the reason for that is so that you have to respect the initiative order. Because if everybody could just ready their action, then the initiative order basically wouldn't matter. And people like initiative. So they want to keep it that way. So readying an action seems reasonable. Only do it if you think it's going to give you a big advantage, or it's narratively necessary, or it's worth taking an action and reaction to do whatever the readied action is. So just something to think about. And those are the big actions that shape combat. Attack, disengage, dash, help, hide, search, ready. Those are the big actions. At this point, if you've listened this far, you basically get the shape of Dungeons & Dragons combat. But there are still some topics. There are two topics that I couldn't really figure out how to fit in, but I think are important to know. Cover is pretty cool. If you have half cover, so if you're behind a low wall and the wall covers half of you, then you have half cover. You get a +2 bonus to your AC. That's it. You get +2 bonus to your AC against ranged attacks. That's pretty awesome. That's really cool. If you have 3/4 cover, so if it's up to your shoulders maybe, then you get a +5 bonus to AC. That's humongous. So this is also one thing I like about cover is that it's from the perspective of the attack. So if we're running through a forest and I'm trying to shoot at you, then even though you might not be trying to get behind cover, you might have cover because forests are full of bushes and trees and stuff and I can't really see you very well. You might have half cover for that. If you're sitting in your home in a window and you don't even know that I'm shooting at you, you probably have 3/4 cover. I can probably only see a little bit of you. That's a big bonus to your AC. So cover is a big part of combat, but it can come up. I'd say if you're a DM, keep cover in mind when somebody is trying to make a shot, especially if they're trying to make a shot through everybody else in combat. That's a big deal. A DM I'm playing with right now has an excellent ruling, which I really love, which is if the cover makes the difference between whether the attack hits or not. So if my AC is 16, but I have +2 from cover, and they roll a 17, then the attack hits the cover. That is narratively how this DM has ruled it. And I really think it's one of those things that makes so much sense. It's very easy, it's very fun, and it lets your players feel like, whoa, it worked. I got behind this tree trunk and it saved my life. That's awesome. Finally, the last topic I really want to cover is temporary hit points, because they're weird. Some things give you temporary hit points. Usually spells. There are other things that can give you temporary hit points. Temporary hit points are cool. They give you a little bonus, but they don't stack, is the term that people use for it. So if two things give you temporary hit points, you get the larger number of hit points. If something gives me 4 temporary hit points and something else gives me 10 temporary hit points, then I don't get 14, I get 10. Because you can't add them together. I only get the bigger one. And if you have temporary hit points, if I have 10 temporary hit points from this effect, and somebody heals me, let's say I have 10 temporary hit points, and I take 6 damage, and then somebody heals me for 5. I don't heal back up. I've lost those temporary hit points forever. That's what makes them temporary, is that once I lose them, I don't have them anymore. And that is combat in Dungeons & Dragons. I know this episode is a little bit explainy. It's a lot of what is this? Why is this? Combat is the thing that people have the most questions about and the most misunderstandings about, and is the hardest thing to wrap your head around, and it's 99% of the rules we're going to talk about later, so I tried to be as clear as I possibly could while talking about it. Thank you so much for listening. I also wanted to shout out something that we did as a podcast. As of this month, we took all of the Patreon money that we get, and we've donated it to Black Lives Matter. All of us live in America, and if you've tuned into the news lately, come on, America. We need to donate to things. We've also, the members of the team have all combined to match the donation that the podcast made to a different nonprofit that we're passionate about, the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network, NQTTCN. All of this is on our Twitter, but I know not everybody is following us on Twitter, which is a whole separate issue, which we will talk about, which we'll talk about right now. If you want to reach out and you have rules questions, I've gotten a bunch of rules questions from emails. It's really fun. If you want to have a rules question that you don't mind having out in the open, tweet at secondbestu. Second best you is spelled how it sounds. And it is a blast to do this for you all. I really enjoy it. Thank you so much for reading the rules with me. If you want to keep reading, but you don't want to read ahead, I totally get that. Let me recommend to you a book called Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Rowanhorse. It is freaking awesome, honestly. It's like post-apocalyptic magic stuff. I love it. There's gods, there's guns, it's got everything that you could want in a book. It's full of pages that are full of words that will make you delighted. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye! Second Best You is created by Stephen Buckley and is produced by Stephen Buckley and Marty Scanlon. All music is by Marty Scanlon. Second Best is produced by Stephen Kelly and Marty Scanlon. You can follow us on Twitter at SecondBestU or SecondBestDND. And you can check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/secondbestdnd. Thanks!